The Death God's Daily Troubles by MagicalDucky. Chapter 20. I'm just your normal average adventurer here today to subjugate some slimes. Solaria Shopping District. The Ironclad Forge. Kyle's point of view. The sound of scraping metal filled the room as I accurately carved out the circle for a barrier spell on a throwing knife before placing a monster core into the slot on the bottom of the handle. I held the throwing knife in my hand and inspected it a bit before inserting it into the holster attached at my left wrist. After making sure everything was in place, I pulled on the diagonal belts lining my long coat to make sure that they were strapped tightly before placing the engraving tools on the counter and turning to Lucas with a grin. "All right, finally finished. Thanks for lending me your engraving tools, Lucas." "Sure, no problem, Kai. By the way, everything fits fine, right?" "Yep, perfectly." I ran my hand through my hair and struck a pose as I stood there in the middle of the empty shop. I was wearing the red, long coat that Lucas made, and a pair of black pants covered my legs, while on my hands were a pair of thin black gloves. On the back of each glove was an alchemy circle with a small metal bezel in the center holding a monster core. And the different circles' designs and colors of the monster cores on the back of each glove indicated that they were two distinct spells. I let out a confident chuckle as I let my hands drop to my sides before turning to Lucas again. "But man, good thing you finished preparing everything so soon. Today's the first time I'm going to be doing practical training with my students." So it would have been really awkward to show up in my normal clothes after telling them all to gear up for a fight. I honestly only expected the coat to be adjusted, but you even finished my order of throwing knives in time. Lucas turned to me with a beaming smile and a sparkle in his eyes before replying with a proud tone in his voice. "Of course, Kai. You're a paying customer right now. That's our duty to make sure that we complete our customers' requests to the best of our ability. Anyway, even if you weren't a paying customer right now, how could I not put my best efforts into the very first test run of my masterpiece? I made sure the coat would fit as perfectly as possible according to your measurements. And the throwing knives were all individually forged by me yesterday. Uncle Greyhill should be done with your sword any second now, too, so if you have any additional requests, just let me know." "Nope. This is more than enough. Thanks, Lucas." "Like I said before, no problem. Just make sure to tell me how your practical training session goes later. Some results from actual fights would help me a ton for my next masterpiece. Oh, and if any of your students actually understand the magnificence of my masterpiece, then do me a favor and let them know that it was me that made it." Lucas let out a prideful laugh, and I smiled back at him for a moment before the door to the back of the forge opened up. Uncle Greyhill walked out carrying a long sword in a sheath, and after placing it on the counter, he looked towards me with a grin. "All right, laddie, here is your sword. It ain't exactly made out of orchilium like the lassies, but I tried to make it as close to your specifications as possible, and I guarantee it's a quality blade." I picked up the sword on the counter before unsheathing it. It was just a simple, unengraved longsword made out of a regular steel, and the blade shone with a silverish gleam, while the edge seemed razor-sharp. Man, I guess I really underestimated Uncle Greyhill's skill, huh? Even with the needlessly detailed requests I made for the sword, he still managed to follow them down to the letter. The weight and the length are perfect, and although I don't know the first thing about blacksmithing, even I can tell that forging something to exact specifications is insanely difficult. I held the long sword in my hands and tested out the balance of the sword by taking a few slow practice swings. At first, it was slow enough that it looked more like I was waving a metal stick around than it did a sword swing. But after making sure that the center of gravity was in the right place, I decided I should test out how the sword would hold up once I moved a little faster. Wait, how fast should I go? I mean, the best test would be to swing as fast as I can, but thinking about what happened last time with the ice sword, well, perhaps holding back this time a little bit wouldn't hurt. After all, if I swung hard enough, the wind pressure would probably make a mess of the shop. And anyway, I'm only bringing a sword in case we run into any dangerous monsters, so hopefully I won't need to use it to fight at all. If we stick around the designated beginners areas, we should be fine. I grabbed the handle of the sword and precisely controlled the amount of strength in my arm as it shot diagonally outward. The blade cleanly sliced through the air while I was at the speed of my swing wasn't very fast. I could tell that the sword had a solid core to it, and at least enough of it could survive a few full power swings. After turning back to Lucas and Uncle Greyhill, I sheathed the sword again. "How is it, laddie?" "I don't know how you did it, but it's perfect." "Thanks, Uncle Greyhill." "Don't mention it, laddie. Just do me a favor and say hello to the lassie for me when you see her." "Yeah, tell Miss Arya I said hi, too." Uncle Greyhill gave me a hearty chuckle as I waved goodbye to him and Lucas before grabbing my small bag of supplies off the floor and walking out of the shop. After leaving the shop, I reoriented myself before turning towards the direction of the Adventurers Guild. As I took a step forward, my left hand holding my new longsword in its sheath naturally fell to my left side and tried to hang it at my waist, but it seemed that I'd forgot my throwing knives were there already. Ah, crap, looks like I'm still not used to carrying around an actual sword with me, huh? Hell, even just having a sheath for it in the first place felt weird when you've been used to making everything out of thin air for the past 1,000 years. Well, at least Uncle Greyhill thought ahead and gave me a sheath with a strap on it. I guess another leather belt to add to my growing collection it is. I stood there awkwardly in the middle of the street as I fiddled around with the leather strap and the sheath of my new longsword before figuring out how to sling it over my shoulder. After attaching it to my back, I double-checked that I had everything I needed on me before making my way over to the Adventurers Guild where I told everyone to meet me today. Solaria, Southern District, Solaria's Adventurers Guild. Kyle's point of view. The Adventurers Guild in the capital city was massive. It was a huge building that looked more like a mansion than an Adventurers Guild. It was 3 stories tall, nothing like the small wooden building in Delhurst, and the ornate main entrance was carved out of what seemed to be marble, while the arched windows lining the light gray brick walls gave the whole building a sudden kind of noble feel to it, despite the fact that most of the inhabitants were anything but. Today seemed to be a slow day, though, probably due to the last dregs of the summer heat, as there were barely any people. There were maybe a few dozen adventurers coming in and out at most, not nearly as many as when I saw the guild for the first time last fall. So, while the guild was huge, it barely took more than a few seconds to spot out where the class was. I saw them gathered together standing by the entrance as they talked to each other and looked around the crowd, presumably to find me. Halbert was wearing light armor with pieces of metal strapped here and there, and a huge greatsword, almost as tall as him, was strapped to his back. The way he had it strapped to his back kind of reminded me of the way that Arya did it, but maybe it was just the fact that I was at the Adventurers Guild again that was filling my head with memories of our time in Delhurst. Standing next to Halbert was Rangus, who was also donning similar-looking light armor. However, attached to his back was a slim, silver-colored spear with a simple, unadorned spearhead instead of a large greatsword like Halbert had. Moving on to Zane, he had a full leather armor on. Small cloak covered his shoulders, and there was a metal staff in his hands, and he stood there, hunched over while using the staff like a cane. Rena was dressed in a brown hooded robe that went down a little past her knees. The underneath of her robe seemed to be like she was wearing some loose clothes which let her move around easier. She also had a staff like Zane, however hers was wood, and was also just slightly taller than her, as she held it to her sides. Finally, standing next to Rena was Sophie, who had some pieces of leather armor on to cover her vital points. Her abdomen and limbs were basically unprotected, and the small pouch that was attached to the right side of her belt, while a pole-shaped object around the length of her arm was wrapped in a cloth, was being worn horizontally at the back of her waist. Speaking of which, this is probably as good of a time as any to explain why we're all out here in the adventurer's gear today. After all, today is a Wednesday, so you're probably wondering why we're not in class right now. You see, after Mari came back from her important meeting 2 days ago and found me crying by myself in a hole outside, well, first of all, she yelled at me for ruining the Academy's lawn, but after that, she mentioned that her presence was requested for another important meeting involving the Empire's Grand Mages, and that she would probably be busy for the whole day today. So, of course, I had to take this opportunity to finally get some practical training in. After all, Sophie might be perfectly okay with how things have been going on so far, but I doubt anyone else, including me, could stand just sitting in a classroom and studying circles every day. Anyway, Mari told me that she didn't care what I did in class today as long as I stayed out of trouble. So technically, this isn't breaking the rules at all if we're just out here in the safe zone for beginners to test out some alchemy circles on slimes and whatnot. We're in the heart of the Empire, so everywhere nearby is basically a safe zone since almost all the strong monsters have been cleared out already. And because of that, there's basically only beginners in the guild. Occasionally, there's a rare uproar over a few A-rank or S-rank adventurers reporting back to the guild after specially assigned quests, but most of the time, the guild here is packed full of newbies. So they've put a lot of work into making sure everyone around here is safe and accounted for. I heard they even make your guild cards for you on the spot when you register here. So there shouldn't be any long wait for everyone to get their guild cards like there was for me in Delhurst. But anyway, now you might be asking me, why are we out here then if we're just wanting practical training? Wouldn't just going out and setting up some training dummies in the academy field be safer? Well, you would be correct. But I know that Rangus is always thirsty for ways to use ancient alchemy in a real fight. So, I think that getting some first-hand experience fighting monsters is much more valuable than just blasting some stationary target dummies. Coincidentally, there just happens to be a problem with the slime population around here right now, since most of the newbies don't want to work in the summer heat, so no one has been keeping the slime population under control. But I assure you that the high reward on slime subjugation missions right now have absolutely nothing to do with why we're all out here today. It's just happenstance that I'll be taking a slime subjugation quest today. After all, I live in this beautiful city and walk through its streets every day, don't I? So I have to do my part to keep it safe from the upcoming slimy crisis. Any monetary gain from my actions is purely accidental. Anyway, getting back on track. I'm sure we'll all be fine. We're just doing some practical training out in the woods nearby. And we even have with us a seasoned adventurer, me. It isn't like before when I had to be cautious of everything because I didn't know how strong the monsters had gotten. I know about all the common monsters nearby, and none of them are a problem for anyone even remotely competent. So, theoretically, anyone from the abnormally talented student population this year, or the golden generation as Mari puts it, should be able to easily defeat dozens of monsters. And in case we're really unlucky and somehow we do run into something dangerous, I might take a bit of a beating, but I can at least distract it while everyone else runs away, right? I started walking towards everyone, and it looked like Rena spotted me as I saw her hug her staff and get everyone else's attention before pointing at me. The rest of them looked over, and Halbert waved at me as I made my way over to them. "Professor Kyle, over here!" I looked up to the sky to check the position of the sun, and it looked like it was approximately 10 a.m. A little earlier than our intended meeting time, but since everyone was already here, starting early wouldn't be bad. "Hey, everyone." I waved to everyone before Zane cried out in disbelief while beads of sweat dripped down from his forehead. "Wait, Kai, how the hell are you even alive in that tacky long coat? I only came out here in the sweltering heat with full battle gear on because you said we were going to be fighting some monsters today. But we haven't even done anything yet, and I'm already dying." "Oh, well, I've gotten used to working in the heat after spending so much time running around the southern part of the Empire. But is my coat really that tacky?" I looked down at the red coat Lucas gave me and patted it a bit before looking to everyone else for their opinions. Well, it's, pretty unique, I guess," said Albert. Yeah, it really makes you stand out," cried Rena. "You don't have to lie. Just tell me what you think. It's tacky, it's all right. I won't be mad." Halbert and Rena had awkward smiles on their faces as they let out dry laughs and tears flowed out of my eyes before I turned to Sophie and Rangus. Rangus just stood there with a slightly embarrassed look on his face and crossed his arms while I could see that Sophie was covering her mouth with her hands and struggling not to laugh. However, After a moment, she finally couldn't hold herself back anymore and burst out into hysterical laughter as she pointed at me. What the hell are you wearing, Professor Kyle? A coat, okay? I think it's pretty cool. Anyway, just let's get going. I think I'm starting to feel the heat too, so come on, follow me inside. Huh? Inside? Inside where? The Adventurers Guild. Where else? Why do you think I had you all meet me here in front of it? After all, you need to be registered adventurers if you're gonna be out there fighting monsters. It's the law, right, Rena? Yes. If I remember, the law states that self-defense against monsters is fine, but you do need to be registered as an official adventurer, or even have some sort of permit from a local authority if you're going to be actively hunting monsters within the Empire's territory. Wait, we're registering as adventurers? Why didn't you just say so? Lead the way then. Quick, Kai. Zane immediately popped back to life as a passionate sparkle appeared in his eyes, and I could see him jittering around in anticipation as he looked towards the guild hall. It's just registering as an adventurer. Why are you so excited? What do you mean? Don't you get it, Kai? We're registering as adventurers. Genuine adventurers. It's every young boy's dream to become an adventurer, roaming around the world, fighting monsters, and getting the ladies. Besides, haven't you ever looked up to a famous S-rank adventurer when you were a kid, like the Blue Frame, Seraphina O'Righton, or the Dragon Slayer of Stone? Well, when I was younger, I was pretty busy dealing with other things, so not really. And trust me, going out into the woods and fighting monsters for a living is a lot different than you might think it is. Same goes for slaying dragons. I scratched the back of my head with an unenthusiastic look on my face as I waved to everyone to follow me. My legs dragged me slowly towards the door, and we all entered into the large guild hall together. However, the moment I stepped foot into the guild hall, my lethargy disappeared, and I was overcome with a strange sense of nostalgia. The late summer sunlight shone through the windows, illuminating the clean wooden lobby, and the myriad of adventurers stood there in line at the large receptionist desks. Crowded around several large bulletin boards with quests of all kinds pinned to them, or just sitting at tables nearby chatting with each other. It was a picturesque scene straight out of a fantasy anime. And for a moment, I was overwhelmed. It finally felt like I was walking into a real adventurers guild for the first time. I see. So this is what it feels like to be in a real adventurers guild, huh? I guess I can understand you a bit more now, Zane. Looks like I've forgotten just what it means to be a true adventurer. To be someone who fights monsters for a living. Someone whose favorite pastime is bragging about their death-defying feats over a round of drinks with friends. And, most importantly, someone who isn't immediately singled out and avoided like the plague when walking to a room full of peers. This is what a genuine adventurer's experience is. It is nothing like what happened with Arya. I took a deep breath while a smile inadvertently made its way onto my face. There was only one receptionist at the counter today, since it seemed to be quite a slow day. But I didn't mind it at all, and I led everyone over to wait in the short line before turning around to them. Zane had an enthusiastic smile on his face, and he quickly glanced around, while Rengus and Halbert, too, took in their surroundings with a sense of wonder. Rena wasn't too moved, since she was probably used to this kind of atmosphere after working as a receptionist at the Adventurers Guild herself, but it seemed that Sophie felt more like I did, as she inspected the inside of the guild hall with a faint smile. All right, everyone, looks like there's only one receptionist today, so it might take a bit longer than expected to register, but we started a little early, so we should be fine. Anyway, I can just hold our place in line for now. If you guys want to, you can go explore around while we wait. Then I'll be heading over to the quest board if anyone wants to come check it out with me, said Halbert. I guess it wouldn't hurt to see what quests are available, so I'll tag along with you, said Rengus. How about the rest of you? Sure, I'll join you, replied Sophie. Well, if you don't mind, I guess I'll go join you too, cried Rena. I'm good. You guys can go on without me. I'm going to go see if there are any famous adventurers here today. All right, then, we'll be back in a few minutes, replied Halbert. Everyone except Zane walked off to go check out the bulletin boards full of quests as Zane started looking around to see if he could recognize anybody famous. Eventually, after a few moments, it seemed like he spotted someone, and he pointed over to the table in the back of the lobby. Wait, hey, isn't that Mountain Axe Lloyd? Who? I looked towards the table that Zane was pointing at with a curious look, and the person who landed in my sights was a large, middle-aged man with large battle axe on his side, leaning against the table. He had short black hair and a rough beard, while his outfit consisted of metal armor, and he held a mug of what seemed to be ale in his hands as he was laughing at a few other adventurers sitting with him. Mountain Axe Lloyd. Is he famous or something? Wait, Guy, you don't know about Mountain Axe Lloyd? He's the B-rank adventurer who took down a giant stone python by himself. They say he chopped the head off clean with one swing of his axe. Nope, never heard of him. Actually, I don't know about any of the adventurers around here. I was only active as an adventurer near the Zorlon Mountains at the southern edge of the Empire before I retired. So this is the first time I've ever seen or set foot in the Capital's Adventurers Guild. I guess it kind of makes sense then. After all, Mountain Axe Lloyd is only active around the capital, but he's still a veteran B-rank adventurer. So you must have really been in the boonies down south for if you don't even think you have heard his name once. Why? Is B-rank supposed to be really famous? Well, most B-rank adventurers are only well known locally, but most of the stronger ones have had their names spread somewhere. Then you get to the A-rank adventurers, and the S-rank is when you really start to get genuinely becoming famous. Huh, really now? Huh. Looks like Arya's more famous than I thought. Well, I guess there's the whole Knights Captain thing too, but she hasn't actually made any public appearances yet. So she's probably still a lot more well known as the Crimson Rose, or at least in the southern part of the Empire anyway. I mean, I've never really heard much about any other famous adventurers either, but I guess barely talking to anyone back in Delhurst really does kind of do that to you. Anyway, Arya hasn't taken on any quests in a while, so her fame, well, perhaps even more like infamy, has probably died down a little after becoming inactive. Anyway, I'm going to go see if I can get his autograph. I'll be back in a bit, Kai. All right, then. Zane ran off to the table where Mountain Axe Lloyd was sitting with an excited glint in his eyes as I turned around to face the receptionist's desk again. A few minutes passed by as I waited peacefully in the line, and the indistinct chatter in the background gave me a warm sensation inside me before I finally came back to my senses. There was only a single person left ahead of us in line, and I was about to call out to the class, but when I turned towards the direction of the bulletin board, they were already coming back together. Hey guys, we're the next in line. Yeah, we made it back in time. Hey, Kai, I think the guy in front is done already. Huh? I turned around to see the man previously standing in front of the receptionist's desk start to leave. Oh, you're right. Well, looks like we're up then. Standing behind the counter was a young lady with long brown hair and blue eyes who looked like she was about in her mid-20s or so. All right, Kai. She doesn't seem to be scared of you like Rena was. Your starting point is already miles ahead of where it was last time. So just act normal and don't mess this up. I walked up to the receptionist's desk with a smile as she greeted me. Hello, sir. How can I help you? Hi, I'm actually here to reactivate my guild card since it's been inactive for the past year or so. No problem, sir. I'll just need your guild card for a few moments. Sure. I rummaged through my pockets and pulled out my guild card before handing it over to the receptionist. Here you go. Oh, by the way, there aren't any rules against partying up with newly registered adventurers, right? The kids behind me are actually going to be registering as adventurers today, and I would like to form a party with them. Huh. There shouldn't be any problem. It's just recommended that you do lower-level quests when in the party with the beginners. Really? Well, that's great then. I was a little scared that I wouldn't be able to form a party with them since my rank is a bit on the higher side. I let out a relieved sigh as the receptionist lady giggled a bit and took my guild card before walking into the office behind the counter. A few moments passed by as I was waiting peacefully before I suddenly heard the door burst open. The receptionist lady came out of the office, walked up to the counter again, but this time there was a bit of a scared look on her face before she bowed deeply towards me. Why do I have a bad feeling about this? Excuse me, sir? A brief moment of panic ensued before I immediately held my finger up to my mouth and gestured for her to be quiet. Her hand shot up and covered her mouth the moment she saw me gesture to her. But it seems that her initial outburst still caught the class's attention, and they were all staring at me with confused faces. Is everything okay? Asked Halbert. I turned around slowly with nervous smiles on my face before responding to Halbert's question. Don't worry. Everything's fine. The receptionist was just a little surprised. I let out a dry laugh before facing the receptionist again. The class stared at me for a second, but after that they seemed to let it go, and they started chatting amongst themselves again. Please, quiet down a little bit, miss. I don't want to make a big scene. I won't hurt you or anything. Just want to reactivate my guild card and take a slime subjugation quest with my students. So just treat me like you would any other normal adventurer. I whispered to her while pleading with her to be quiet, and after a moment, it looked as though she calmed down a bit. There was still a bit of fear in her eyes, but it seemed that she got the message, and she took her hands away from her mouth before beginning to speak softly to me. I apologize for the inconvenience, sir. I didn't realize before that you were, well, high-ranked. I promise it won't happen again, so please have your guild card back. The receptionist held my guild card shakily with both hands before handing over to me respectfully. It was then that I realized my mistake. On my guild card was the glowing letter A, where my guild rank was supposed to be. I guess I did get promoted after all, huh? Well, I was already a B rank after completing so many high-level quests with Arya back in Dullhurst, and we did report slaying the dragon on the mountain range to the guild, so looking back, it really was only a matter of time before I was promoted. I mean, I never really bothered checking my rank because I retired and moved to the capital with Arya right after we killed the dragon. And it's not like I even had the mana to activate the spell on my guild card and check my rank. So I just kind of forgot about it. Well, since I was promoted, chances are Arya was probably promoted to S rank too. At least she deserves it, and like me, she's a genuinely strong swordsman. While I always just tagged along on her quests and barely ever did anything. So I always kind of felt that my rank was undeserved. But looks like the guild doesn't care about my feelings much. Anyway, I hope no one else saw my rank. I don't want this to be a repeat of what happened in Dullhurst, and I'm perfectly content with just being treated as an average adventurer. I took my guild card back from the receptionist with a helpless smile on my face before slipping it back into my pocket, as it looked like the receptionist finally regained control of herself. Is there anything else I can help you with today, sir? The receptionist said. Well, my students need to register as adventurers, so if you could help us with that too, that would be great. The receptionist stiffened up a bit, and she gave me a salute before replying in a determined voice. Don't worry, sir. I'll make sure their registrations goes as smoothly as possible. Really? Thank you, miss. I gently smiled at her as she stopped saluting me before lowering her head and staring at the countertop. For a moment there, it seemed like her face turned a little red, but I didn't even bother thinking about it as I breathed an internal sigh of relief for finally navigating through the minefield of a conversation. Solaria, Southern District, Solaria Adventurers Guild. Halbert's point of view. I saw it. It was a simple metal card, thin and seemingly made of silverish metal. The Adventurers Guild symbol was inscribed into the metal of the card itself, signifying that it was a genuine guild card issued by the guild itself. And next to that inscribed symbol was some text. The first line read, Name,
Kyle. There was nothing unexpected about that. It was just Professor Kyle's name, but what was written underneath that was something unbelievable. There was another line of text, simply read, rank, and to the right of that was a softly glowing letter A. It was only for the briefest of moments that I caught a glimpse of the small metal card before Professor Kyle put it back into his pocket. And I probably wouldn't have even noticed it if the receptionist's yell before didn't make me alert. But none of that changed the undeniable truth. Professor Kyle is an A-rank adventurer. I don't really know much about adventurers, and I never really cared enough to learn about them in detail. However, one thing I do know is that an A-rank adventurer was definitely someone who was strong. Much, much stronger than me. I stared at Professor Kyle's back, and there was a simple sheathed longsword strapped diagonally to his back, and that tacky red coat he was wearing hid the shape of his body. But despite all this, I could still make out the outline of his shoulders. His shoulders weren't very broad. In fact, I always considered him to be more on the slender side, and the image of him in my mind was always someone who had a light-hearted and goofy demeanor. He was always just someone you could laugh with, and even with his unusual aloofness, he looked like he would help you out if you ever needed it. I mean, I always realized in the back of my head that he had probably been in his fair share of fights, and he was skilled enough to be teaching what was essentially battle alchemy. And I still remember the time he ended up swinging so hard with a frost blade that it shattered. But perhaps it was the mere fact that he was manaless that made me see him the way I did. I never saw him as someone strong. I took a deep breath. I tried my best to hide my shock as I glanced around at the rest of the class. Rena, Sophia, and Zane seemed to be preoccupied with talking to each other about something, so they probably didn't see it. But when I locked eyes with Rengus, I could tell. He saw it too. In his eyes was the same disbelief that was in mine, and we stared at each other for a moment before Professor Kyle turned around to face us. "All right, I'm done. You guys can register now. Luckily, we're in the capital, so it shouldn't take more than a few minutes to get your guild cards." He called out to us in the same carefree smile on his face as he always had, and it seemed like the receptionist was already prepared, as there were 5 registration forms placed on the counter neatly. I walked up to one of the registration forms and started to fill it out. I reformed my mental image of Professor Kyle before I heard Rengus whisper to me from my side. "A rank, huh?" "Yeah." Even after the small exchange, neither of us said a word to each other until we got our guild cards.